One of the things I learned was in Holland. So after the war, I mean, obviously there is a lot of the American soldiers are buried out in the Normandy cemetery. I didn't realize that there's a big cemetery in Holland. And after the war, the government decided that they were going to donate some of their best farming land to be the cemetery for the American soldiers that had died. And on top of that,
a symbol of like high respect.
Yes, shouldn't they? Yes, they deserve to be in the best soil because they gave their lives for our freedom. But that also is the thing that made me go, like in the back of my mind, this was like 5 days until the end of the trip, but it was always kind of in the back of my mind of 17, I'm 31. Man, like those, I've almost lived twice the lifetime of them. And what am I doing with my life except for I trying to hold a marriage together that didn't hold together, trying to find a career so I can survive on my own and treat myself to a once in a lifetime trip, right? And it's like, but what am I really doing with my life?
Yeah. You are listening to the Life Reimagined podcast, where we are redefining and reimagining what's possible. We're prioritizing and really going after our live it now list, not a bucket list, but instead committing to living our lives now with more curiosity, more intention, and way more fun over 40. I'm your host, Wendy, and you joining me today represents my own unexpected and fantastic chapter. And it took a little risk, a little courage, but it's been such a wonderful journey and adventure. Our guests share and inspire with their story about either how they decided to take a big step forward or go on that epic adventure now, what the experience was like, what they learned from it, and how it shaped much more in them going forward. I'm really happy you're here, and I hope our stories inspire and empower you to go after something on your Live It Now list and take some action today. So let's hop in. Sarah Blake is with me today, and she and I connected in a local women's organization on entrepreneurship, and we immediately connected. Sarah shared her story about her World War II adventure. So if you've ever seen Band of Brothers or even like Saving Private Ryan, you get more curious about what really it was like to be in the middle of World War II. You know, as a kid, I heard certain stories, and yes, I had my history class, but unfortunately, I did not appreciate history until after my grandparents had passed. So I didn't get to ask them more questions about what they knew of that time. But I have traveled in Europe quite a bit, and every time I'm in Germany and in the areas where World War II battles were fought, it always raises more of my curiosity. So when I learned about Sarah's really amazing trip to go see the World War II sites with a veteran and learn much more in depth about what the day-to-day life was like for Easy Company and others, I thought it was fantastic. And it's something that I thought I would share, and something I thought would be wonderful for our community to hear. Let's dive in and hear from Sarah about what made her trip and experience so incredible, and then all the other learnings she took away from it that have shaped her path going forward. So, okay, so this is a perfect segue. So let's talk about, I'm going to introduce, so Sarah Blake is with me today, and I'm really excited because we met through a mutual group that I love called Second Act Women here in Colorado. And she started to share a story with me about a trip that I just adored and said, okay, I need to share this with my audience. And so Sarah agreed to chat with me today, and we're going to cover many, many things. But I would just like to, first of all, say welcome, Sarah. So glad to have you today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
And Sarah's already helping me again connect as we've pivoted our Life Reimagined podcast. We've shared so many stories of women's resilience, and now we're going to focus a little bit more on looking forward and what we're looking forward to. Like, what are the fun things that we're not going to wait any longer for? Because we've got this one shot at it, which Sarah's going to help us again share that message. But what are we going to do to make this next chapter our best? And that's what we're focused on today. So Sarah is the perfect guest to kick us off and get us going in this new direction. So Sarah, let's start first with how you decided to get into this history tour, how this all started for you. And then we're going to dive into what was the tour actually like? What did it feel like experience? And then a little bit later, we're going to talk about the ahas and kind of how did your life change after this tour? So let's start with what the heck? How did you decide to take, and what tour is it?
So it was the Band of Brothers World War II tour across Europe.
Across Europe. Okay.
Yes, it was across Europe.
Okay. So you took this tour. How did this even get started in your head?
So I first started being interested in World War II because of the movie Memphis Belle, because Harry Connick Jr. was in it.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Right? So you got to love Harry.
Harry.
That movie, it made me go, oh my gosh, this generation is pretty interesting, and started looking into it more. And then HBO did the miniseries of the Band of Brothers. It was like a 10-part miniseries. And I was like, this is fascinating. Ended up getting divorced after that. He came out, got divorced, and I was like, I want to do an international trip. And the whole notion of doing something alone was a little scary to me, but I was like, okay, not going to let that be an excuse. So what could I do if I wanted to go across Europe? And I was like, oh, I like Band of Brothers, and found the Stephen Ambrose tour company. He's the guy who wrote the book, and they actually have a Band of Brothers trip that starts in Camp Toccoa, Georgia, where they trained. And then we went over to England and then hit all the major spots. And the best part about this was there was going to be a World War II veteran from H Company that was going to be on the trip too. So you got like the real life living history experience. And I kept trying to find people to go with me, and nobody was interested in spending
Nobody would go.
Not a boatload of money on it. And I can remember a colleague had just told me a story how he was up in the mountains, Rocky Mountains, and fell off his bike, busted himself all up, and I panicked for him, like, oh my gosh, what if you broke a leg? What if you got bit by a rattlesnake and you were there all alone? And he just looks me dead in the eyes and goes, see, Sarah, that's why you'll never do anything alone and on your own. And I was like, I'll show him. And I printed out the paperwork and signed and faxed my deposit. And that was February, and the trip was in September. And I said, dang it, I'm going with or without anybody. I'm going to do this trip.
Yep. And actually several of the people I've interviewed to date, and in my Life Reimagined community, all love the solo trip. So this was going to be your first solo trip, and it's different than a single trip.
Yes. And it's not a singles trip where they're trying to hook you up with other people, like a dating trip. But it was with a tour company. And that's why I decided to do it, because it felt safer to do this. But it was like the very first night when we did our welcome dinner, I think that there was maybe 3 of us that were solos. And everybody else was a lot of husbands and wives, and the wives didn't realize like how much of a history trip this was going to be. A lot of fathers and sons. And there was one 17-year-old girl who convinced her grandmother to take her on this trip, which was fabulous. To see somebody, I think besides her, I was the youngest person on this trip. And definitely the only single female. Actually, that's not true. There was a 60-year-old lady from Utah who came on the trip too. So, yeah, it was. But it was
your first time going solo with a group you don't know at all.
I knew nobody, absolutely nobody.
So after the gauntlet is down, you get told you'll never go alone. You sign the check, you get going. Okay, so now you're getting closer to the date. Were you getting more nervous, or were you getting more relaxed with the idea?
It was an excitement. And sometimes that can be the nervous excitement. And sometimes it's the, oh my gosh, I'm actually doing this. I don't know 100% what I'm in for, but I know I'm not going to be left alone. I think that was the biggest thing and so it was that excitement, and also people being very surprised. I like the fact that people were so surprised that I was like, screw it, I'm doing it.
Yep. And that's actually, especially post-divorce, that's a very vulnerable time, even because you're really having to adjust to a lot. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then you connect with everybody, you show up. All right. Was it at all what you expected when you first showed up?
I'm not sure I really went in with too many expectations. I did expect to be probably one of the younger people there, probably one of the only solo females there, and really being a female on this trip alone was a little different. And I was within, I'd say, the first 4 or 5 days, I met up with, there was a gay gentleman from Boston who was actually very nervous being on this military trip, being a gay man in his early 40s at the time, a Mormon woman from Utah who did not follow all the Mormon guidelines, and then 2 other gentlemen from Nashville, Tennessee, which I did not understand wealth until I met them. And they have they met because they had 2 hangars next to each other because they have private planes. And one of them has a P-51 Mustang, which is a World War II era plane. And the other one has a bunch of RAF, Royal Air Force, like a little museum set up in his hangar. And the 5 of us became friends, and we called ourselves the Supper Club, and we ended up not doing dinners with the rest of the tour group. And that actually triggered the notion of, I always have to budget in extra money for the cuisine of the countries I'm going to, and to not worry about, oh my gosh, I don't have enough money for this dinner, because that was like half of the experience. And if it wasn't for those folks basically adopting me and covering half of my meals for me, I wouldn't have experienced the trip the same way I did, in the countries and the conversations and the way I did with those 4 other individuals.
Yeah, that cultural immersion, I think, is so critical. And I think, unfortunately, some people miss that. They go overseas, or they go to another, they go to New York City, or they go to Paris. Mm-hmm. But it's those it's several hour-long dinners where you're just talking with somebody with a very different perspective and learning what their life is like. That is so valuable and so memorable. And that's, I think, what, if people don't have that already worked into their planning of trips, hopefully this will encourage them to think a little bit differently and a little more broadly.
Do it. If that's the one thing you take away from this, experience the culinary culture of wherever you end up going.
Yep. And I have to tell you that, this is a whole different side topic, because I'm not a big foodie. I have the cruddiest taste buds, but I will still try anything, including really bad, the Icelandic, fishy thing. I've tried that before, and it's awful, but hey, I've done it.
I don't know why she's barking. Can you hear her?
I can hear her.
Yeah. I can go put her. Let me go put her outside. I'm sorry. She is. Okay. She is gated upstairs, so she doesn't bark. Okay, hold on. I'm sorry. It's the trash truck or the squirrels. Other than that, I can typically bribe her with a bone full of peanut butter, but it has to be a squirrel. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Okay. Everyone is just used to having the dogs or kiddos interrupt and everything, so it's all good. It's all
okay.
Good. Okay, so now you're on this trip. You found your group, and you guys are having these dinners. So talk a little bit more about what the experience was like. Were you on and off a bus all the time? Were you walking into different fields? Was it what was it like to actually go see this?
It was all of that. So they did have a video, like a VCR thing on the bus. So, before we would hit certain sites, such as like a big field, like a farmer's big field, were one of the very first, encounters that Easy Company had in Band of Brothers. And, one of the military tactics that Captain, at the time he wasn't captain, but, Captain Winters came up with was actually still taught at West Point today because of some tactics that he came up with in the moment. And so we'd see that on the bus and then get out and we could see, you could actually see like the real distance of, and imagine a firefight going on and how somebody could come up with these tactics. And so there is that. We did that. There were some museums that we would on and off the bus to museums. There was, I think most of your listeners will, but at least the term the Battle of the Bulge will say, oh, I know something about that, right? And so that was the one place the veteran did not get off the bus, was in the Ardennes forest right outside of the town of Foy. And he sat there, and I went on this trip to get to know the veteran. And so I would wait, and he had his cane and sometimes the wheelchair. And I'm like, are you sure you don't want to come out? And he's like, I was here I think it was 64 years ago. And my legs have not been the same since. I've been there. I've done that. I don't ever need to see that again. And so that was like, some of those moments, like, it really hits you. And I don't want to say tried to put on a brave face, but he was there to help educate the people that were paying for this trip. But he was like, nope, not going to do it. And so it was like, oh, wow. Like, it just kind of hits you of what they go through and that they really don't talk about it. And then to physically be back at a spot and to say, nope, don't need to do that.
Mm-hmm. So was it a combination of, physical and emotional for him at that time? Or was it strictly emotional that it's okay, he's been there too many times and it's hard?
It's more emotional there, for sure. I became really good friends with him and actually got to go visit him and his family where he's from in Michigan afterwards. But they made accommodations to have a wheelchair as long as one of us was pushing or somebody, helping him with his cane and walk. But that was really more emotional for that one, for sure. It was one of those been there, done that. And if you've seen any of the videos or even the reenactments of what happened out there, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all that he was, nope, thank you. Y'all go do your thing. I'll be waiting here when you get back.
Yeah. And, I never grew up as a history buff. In high school and college, like, the fastest way to put me to sleep was to put a history book in front of me. It just wasn't my thing. But when I moved to South Carolina for grad school and actually saw battlefields, and the State House has markers where Sherman's tanks and artillery came through, it changed my whole perspective of history. So all of a sudden I started getting into it and absolutely love it now. Can't get enough of it. But then you had seen enough, enough to get you to start and take this trip. Did you learn more than you expected, or did it feel different than you expected?
I learned things that I never thought I would have learned, right? And so one of them was, I didn't know tons going into it. I didn't even read the book. I saw the movie, the mini series, and I was like, this is cool. And I get to see 7 different European countries and learn a little bit more about history. One of the things I learned was in Holland. So after the war, obviously there is a lot of the American soldiers are buried out in the Normandy cemetery. I didn't realize that there's a big cemetery in Holland. And after the war, the government decided that they were going to donate some of their best farming land to be the cemetery for the American soldiers that had died. And on top of that,
like a symbol of like high respect. Right?
Yes, shouldn't they? Yes, they deserve to be in the best soil because they gave their lives for our freedom. And I found it fascinating. The only way I could really figure out the analogy of, like, if you're from a big like football city and you have season tickets, like for us, for Denver, Denver Bronco tickets, season tickets typically get passed down generation to generation to generation. Well, that's what happens with the soldiers' burial sites. A family will adopt a fallen soldier and they care for that site, and they also learn everything about that soldier and their history, where they grew up, how when they first enlisted, and they also know where they died. And so when family members come out, American family members come out, they can get connected with the family who has adopted the gravesite, and that family will take them on tours to say, you know, this is where. And that is actually one of the things that really hit me was, it was not scheduled part of the tour, but a family member that had adopted a young gentleman on site took us out, took the entire bus out to, it was somebody that Fred knew, and took us out to this gully.
Fred is your vet.
I'm sorry, Fred is the veteran. Okay. Sorry, Fred is the H Company veteran that was on the trip. Okay. I mean, everybody should just know who Fred is when I say Fred in World War II. Yeah. He was a ladies' man, I can tell you that much. So we were like in this little gully, just a little bit of a gully, and that's when Fred found out this is where this 17-year-old kid was killed, and Fred was carrying the guilt. Fred didn't know where the kid actually ended up dying, but he knew that he sent this kid out on a mission to deliver a message, and the message never got delivered because the kid was killed. And there was so much survivor's guilt. Like for the most part, he would put on a good front, and he would try and find the humor and the fun memories of the places where we were. In this one, it was just emotion that he could not control, of guilt, of feeling like he sent somebody to their death. And there was always more than just one person. But that's what the people of Holland will do, is that they will they know the stories, they know where fallen soldiers were, and to be able to bring that to life and give people closure. That was a beautiful experience to see that. But that also is the thing that made me go, like, in the back of my mind, this was like 5 days until the end of the trip, but it was always kind of in the back of my mind of 17, I'm 31. Man, like those, I've almost lived twice the lifetime of them. And what am I doing with my life except for I trying to hold a marriage together that didn't hold together, trying to find a career so I can survive on my own and treat myself to a once in a lifetime trip, right? And it's like, but what am I really doing with my life?
Yep. And so not only, okay, so you go on this trip, you know that it's already a risk and you're stepping out by taking a solo trip and this is going to be cool, but you start to learn and grow way more than you probably ever expected, because all the experiences, then all of a sudden now your perspective is shifted, right? So then you go again, either in the future, either with Fred, or so how did you get back then? Because I know you connected again with one of the drivers. So how?
Right.
So tell me, okay, so you go through this experience. It's incredible. You learn things like this about the Holland, Dutch people. Yeah. I would never know, right?
Who knew? Right.
Who knew? And so you leave with this really blessed experience. So then how did that change you going forward?
So, the blessed part of this experience for me, there was all the people and just all of the knowledge. But the last night we were taking a little minibus up to the Eagle's Nest, which was Hitler's summer retreat, and we had a private dinner up there. And on the way up there, like I don't journal as much as I would like to, but I was journaling that trip because I knew everything was blurring together. But I'm journaling away, and I can remember it was two sons and a dad. They're looking at me like I'm crazy, and they're like, "What are you doing over there?" And I'm like, I'm writing my bucket list. And they're like, what? And I'm like, I'm writing my bucket list, because that 17-year-old story just hit me. And it's like, I want to do things. And they're like, Sarah, you're too young. You're way too young to do that. And I'm like, but I'm not. I want to learn how to kickbox and do mixed martial arts. I want to jump out of an airplane. I want to be comfortable around firearms. I started calling it my Laura Croft list. I want to learn how to drive motorcycles. I want to learn how to drive motorcycles. I want to live in a foreign country. Right. And so, pulling that all together, and it made me look at my life and say, what am I not doing for whatever reason? And there are so many reasons, and a lot of those reasons had no truth behind them. But starting that list, and so a year later was the 65th anniversary of D-Day, and the tour company knew how much I connected with the veteran Fred, that they invited me to come out to be his family member for the 65th anniversary of D-Day, which, oh my gosh, it was amazing. I only did part of the trip because my younger sister was getting married, so I had to fly out of Paris and didn't do the rest of the trip. But lucky enough that the same bus driver from a year ago was the bus driver for this trip. His name is Haya. And I was catching up with him and telling him, hey, I started my bucket list, and I started doing some of the things on the bucket list. And he just grabs me by the shoulders. Here's this Dutch man, just grabs me by the shoulders, and he's like, Sarah, it's not that life is too short. It's that you have but one life. And that was like one of those, oh my gosh. Yeah. Like people can say life, and the life is too short thing was because of the 17-year-old aspect, but this whole other shift now of, it doesn't matter how short or how long my life is. It's that I only have one. And what am I doing with it?
Absolutely. Yep. So this was a Dutch bus driver, and here you are with Fred. And again, even that experience going back with Fred as his family member, you said Obama spoke, and this huge ceremony. I mean, again, that you would never have been a part of if you hadn't taken that jump a year earlier, right? Or a year and a half earlier and signed up.
Right.
And taking that step. Yeah. Okay. So you're right. So for me, I think, I also had a shift. I had certain things happen in my life, post-divorce for me too, a very close friend with a very scary cancer diagnosis. And at the time, career was great, flying everywhere. I was busy, life's good. I'm building my world. And then I went, oh no, what if I can't do that tomorrow? Or what if I never get to do X or see this place? Yeah. So like you, it just changed my whole perspective. And so I love the fact that, again, this is a kinship in that when you and I started talking, we're both subscribers to the belief that it's a live it now list. Like, do not wait till you're 75 and go on some bucket list, because it's important to go now when you can jump out of an airplane, or you can physically walk across that field and see what it feels like and smell the grass and really empathize with what it was like to be on, in that battle. So then how have you progressed on your bucket list or your live it now list? And you said you did take your skydiving trip?
I did. I was a tandem,
it's okay. Doesn't matter.
I did. Yes, I did that. That was a birthday gift to myself. So yes.
Yeah. And
did that. Got comfortable around firearms. Still not extremely comfortable, but I'm not as scared like before. It's like, I don't even. Trying to think of things shifted though for me also is that like you said
a little more.
So
perspective, because it's all of a sudden, and some people don't get it or haven't experienced it. I think COVID has woken some more people up in this way, especially around our age group, but it is a shift. So talk about this a little bit more about how you kind of thought through this.
So my list, it's funny that for a while there, I was very intent on doing things on my list. Like one of them was to live in a foreign country, learn a foreign language, live in a downtown urban area where I didn't need a vehicle. So I started applying for a bunch of jobs with NATO. At the time, I had the qualifications that would allow me to be applying for those jobs. And not necessarily, things have shifted to the point that a lot of the things on my list aren't necessarily things about who I am today. One thing on my list that has not changed at all is traveling and being okay traveling solo. Again, not single, but solo. Ended up doing Ireland, ended up doing St. Patrick's Day in Dublin, which was amazing. I could convince somebody to go on that trip with me, but I signed up solo and said, if you want to, this is open to anybody who wants to join, great. If not, I'm going. I did have somebody do that and come on that trip with me. And then for my 40th, I wanted to see the Northern Lights, which they say don't schedule a trip to go out to see the Northern Lights because more than likely it's not going to happen unless you do a 3-week trip. And for went to Iceland, had a friend say, yes, I will do that. I apparently got to pick the right places for people to want to go with me. But we saw that
to just go forward with
right. And I would schedule things and I've learned that, with a bunch of the side trips, it was, I'm going to do my side trips. Obviously, you're welcome to do the side excursions also, but we're not doing these trips lockstep, right? Like we don't have to, which was very different mindset from how I grew up, from how I thought my marriage should be, to how I saw other people's relationships being, and going, I can tell you the one thing that really did come out of that trip from the Band of Brothers trip was it would not have been the same experience. It would not have been that holistic, my experience if I went with somebody else. Like that was the big aha moment, which led then into these other trips of me saying, you do you, I'm going to do me. And if they happen to be the same things, great. If not, that's okay, because that's when I got so much more. I wouldn't have met half the people I met on those trips.
No, because you would have been talking with your friend, and you would have been talking about this site or that museum or something.
Yep.
You wouldn't have those amazing in-depth conversations with Fred or with your supper club, right? And you wouldn't have gotten to know these people in the same way. And it is scary for somebody if they're listening and they haven't taken a solo trip. It can be very intimidating or scary. And we have, like you said, you've got this narrative like you're going to be sitting in the corner and the spotlight will be on you and everyone's going to be like, oh my God, she's got no friends. No. It's a totally different experience. And I also love the fact that even when from this point on and you're traveling, you say, you know what, I'm doing A, B, C, and D. If you don't want to do those things, great. I'll meet you up for dinner or I'll meet you at the hotel, because that is a gift I also got from my family growing up, that it's okay to have different interests. And, if we go on places, we just always meet up for dinner. That's kind of our thing. But
right.
We'll see. You go on that excursion, you go this way. But it takes a lot of confidence. And do you feel like with each time that you're doing it, that you're getting more comfortable and more confident about it?
Yes. And I'm learning a lot more about myself. Each one of these trips. I mean, that's been a really, and learning how I come across to my friends, like the people that eventually end up going on trips with me. The person that I did Ireland with towards the end, like I was beyond frustrated with this person. It's like I felt like I did all the planning and all of the work for this trip. And I don't know if you've read the Tao of Poop, like Taoism. There's a book called the Tao of Poop.
I've seen it, but I have not read it.
Okay. So my friend is a poo, where things just happen and they work out great for them, right? And I was like, we're walking out to a fort, you're such a poo, and you can be a poo because all of the people around you take care of stuff for you. And he's like, and he just kind of stops and looks at me and he's like, but I thought you liked planning. And I was like, no, like I don't, like I'm good at it and I don't mind doing it, but I don't like it to the point that I want to plan the entire trip. It's exhausting. No. And that was a big, like, I come across as wanting to be like that in control, and so learning that about myself and how I come across, to be able to have those more open conversations, whether it's dealing with another potential solo trip and someone says, yeah, I want to go along, or just almost anything like that. That was one of the big gifts that I got out of some of these travels.
Was learning more about yourself. Mm-hmm. And and this is the other part I think you and I also have talked with, is that our 25-year-old or our 35-year-old self would not have understood that. Even if today you could go back and tell your younger version would be like, that's great, I'm working, right? Or that's great, I'm raising the kids, or I'm working on my marriage, right? It's different.
Right.
And so I love the fact that at this stage, we learn and discover so much more because it's just a different perspective.
It's a different perspective. And I think for a lot of us, especially our generations, it's a matter of not just the different perspectives, but redefining things. Like for me, one of the big things was redefining success. And success does not have to mean a marriage and kids and a house and so much put away in retirement. And you, by this age, you should be making six figures and blah, blah, blah. It's really redefining what your story is and not the stories that we've been told, whether it's family stories or societal stories.
Right. That we feel like we either have to live out or we have to live up to. You're right. And it wasn't with any malintention, right? It was with, it was shared, these stories were shared with us with love, right? With
love and protection, but it made us, that people, I think it's the terminology is overplayed, but I don't know how else to describe it except for to play small. They put us in boxes. They kept putting us in these boxes, and they put us in the boxes because they thought they were protecting us, and they thought it was out of love, because they wanted to protect us and not see us get hurt. But at that same time, it's made us not dream. It made us not dream big and feel like, oh my gosh, I can have a now list. And it's not a bucket list. It's a now list. And it's okay that I want to experience something instead of taking care of everybody else, because that's what we were taught.
Yep. Put everything else first. Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay. So Sarah, let's then transition and share then how this has informed where you are career and professionally and personally. So you deal with emotional intelligence and a lot of really cool work that, again, I don't know, did you ever, if you were, would you ask your 25-year-old self, would this be the type of work you'd be doing?
I never had dreams. I actually wrote a post, I was a child of the 80s and everything was the sitcom era where you had the problem and then, things were okay. And then the rising conflict and then, and then the resolution and then, Disney story happily ever after. But I was, it's all within 30 minutes. And I wasn't taught how to dream. I was taught, to be, get educated enough that you can get a good job so you can be a functioning member of society, and maybe or maybe not you get married and you procreate, right? But like what that job was or career, it never, I never really had that. I did not ever think I'd really be an entrepreneur or a solopreneur. Had a great career with a defense contractor, was with them for almost 15 years. That turned into a total burnout. That's a whole nother story about what stress can do to you and needing to, I call it my 3-year detox from corporate life, because it really did take that long to get those stories out of my head. And 25-year-old me would have just said, push through it, it's okay. And if my body did not shut down on me the way it did, I think I'd still be there or at another like company, working hard, putting my head down, and that's not my story. My story is to now shift and say, what did I learn from that experience? Because I don't want anybody else going through what I went through. Or my nieces, I think about my nieces, and I think we're still so far away from real, true cultural change company cultural change and societal cultural change. And so I focus on values. Your story, and not the story that you were told to live, and your surroundings, and how those all three need to come together to create alignment. And if one of those are off, that alignment's not going to be there. That flow's not going to be there. But that takes a lot of work to figure out who you are. And 25-year-old me thought she knew everything. And it took this huge shift in going, oh my gosh, who am I? I thought my identity was so tied to a career that, and I didn't have the language. I didn't have the language around values to look at somebody and say, my values are misaligned with yours, so I'm not okay. Whether it's with this behavior or this whatever, I didn't have the language behind values. I didn't do any values work. I mean, I don't think we're really ever taught that until we go off into this entrepreneurial world, and it's encouraged. The stories I do work with the emotional intelligence work and use Carl Jung's archetypal work through culture talk and really understanding who you are versus the stories you were told, who you should be. And then the surroundings, and, whether that's your family surroundings, whether that's your company surroundings, your friends surroundings. And, it's taken a lot of work, but I'm real excited to be working and coaching people. Sometimes we'll go in and do work with, company culture work, and leadership type of work, but you got to know yourself. And that's where that emotional intelligence comes in.
Right. And so somebody's hopefully been listening and says, oh my gosh, I could really use some help aligning my values and my stories and what I'm doing next. So how do they find you? How do they get in touch with you? And if you're listening, of course, we'll be posting this information also in the show notes so that you can find Sarah. But all right, Sarah, so how do they find you? And what's the best, if there's a question they have that makes them go, ooh, I need to talk to Sarah?
So it's really difficult. It's sarahblakeconsulting.com.
And it's Sarah, SARAH.
Yes, BL. There is an H. Blake, BLAKE consulting.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. If you do the LinkedIn, I snagged the Sarah Blake. So LinkedIn.in/Sarah Blake. And email Sarah at sarahblakeconsulting.com.
Easy peasy. Very good. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. It's, like I said, I was never a history buff growing up, but I loved the Band of Brothers. I love Saving Private Ryan. I love anything that has to do with the world as it was in the 40s. And my biggest regret is that I didn't ask my grandparents more questions about this before they left. And so I think it's really cool that you took that leap. And again, what a nice new path that opened up and all these different experiences. So thank you so much for sharing with us today, Sarah. And hopefully those listening are going to be encouraged to not only, that not that life is too short, but that you get it one time. This is one shot at it. And that hopefully they'll be encouraged to take their solo trip, and hopefully they'll be encouraged to make sure that they're proceeding and going forward in alignment with their values.
Yes.
So
thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining Sarah and me today. And Sarah, I hope to see you soon. And for those, we'll catch you next time. Thanks so much for joining. So what do you love about history? Where would you go? Would you go to the Civil War battlefields in the U.S.? There's so much amazing history in Virginia and the Carolinas. Would you go somewhere out west? Would you go to Europe, World War I or World War II? Would you go check out Pearl Harbor in Hawaii? I've seen that, and that's amazing. So there are so many ways you can build a trip or an adventure around something historical. So what floats your boat? And what piques your curiosity? Our podcast is brought to you by our Inspiring Your Next community of bold and amazing women who have all embraced the perspective We only have one life, and we're committed to making this one count. Get more info on my website or connect with me, your own personal adventure concierge, and let's set it up. Thanks for joining us again today. I hope you have a chance to lean in further with some of the free resources in my Destination U website, and maybe connect with Sarah and see how she can help you live more aligned with your values and your story.